He arrived in a foreign land, where the echoes of war never seem to fade, and the silence of loss is louder than any explosion. A soldier, bound by duty, fighting to rebuild what was broken. But in a world where nothing is ever truly fixed, he'll soon find himself fighting a battle he never expected. Her eyes, calm yet full of untold stories. She is everything he was taught to ignore. Her voice, soft, but carries the weight of 1,000 unspoken words. And in the middle of this desolate place, they will discover that the hardest mission is not saving lives, but saving their own hearts. Can a man bound by duty find the courage to choose love over war? Or will the battlefield claim yet another victory? When Sergeant Daniel Reyes first boarded that gray military transport plane, the world he knew seemed to shrink into a single duffel bag slung over his shoulder. Inside were the essentials: combat boots, folded uniforms, a small Bible his mother had pressed into his hands, and a handful of letters he hadn't yet read. But there was one thing missing: hope. Daniel had long ago trained himself to leave hope at home. Hope, in his mind, was dangerous. Hope was fragile, and in war zones, fragile things don't survive. As he took his seat, the steady hum of the engines filled the silence, but inside, his thoughts were louder than the roar outside. He thought about the promise he had made to his little sister, that he'd be back in time for her high school graduation. He thought about his mother, who had kissed his cheek that morning, her lips trembling but her eyes unblinking, determined not to let him see her fear. And he thought about his father, a man who never said much, but whose firm handshake at the airport had carried the weight of 1,000 unsaid prayers. The mission ahead was clear. His unit was being sent overseas, not to fight a war in the traditional sense, but to help stabilize a small, fractured village that had been battered by conflict. On paper, it was peacekeeping. In reality, it was unpredictable. He knew all too well that peacekeeping could turn violent in the blink of an eye. But as the plane lifted into the sky, Daniel forced his jaw to tighten, his eyes to focus. He was a soldier, and soldiers don't dream. Soldiers survive. Hours later, when the transport wheels kissed foreign soil, Daniel's boots followed. The air was different here, thick with dust and the scent of smoke from fires that had burned long before their arrival. Children peered out from behind cracked doorways, their eyes wide and untrusting. Women balanced water jars on their heads, moving quickly, always scanning the horizon. And the men were scarce, either taken by the fighting or working to rebuild what little remained. Daniel adjusted his rifle strap across his chest. He wasn't here to make friends, and certainly not to make promises. His orders were simple: provide security, assist in reconstruction, keep the peace. That was it, nothing more. But even as he walked through the village square, past buildings scarred with bullet holes, past walls where faded murals of peace now looked more like cruel reminders, he couldn't shake the feeling gnawing at his chest. This wasn't just another deployment. Something here felt different. Still, he shoved that thought aside. Soldiers don't listen to feelings. They listen to orders. The first night in the village was quiet, but the kind of quiet that presses against your ears, heavy, almost unnatural. His unit set up camp near the remnants of a schoolhouse, its roof half collapsed, desks overturned like abandoned shields of a forgotten battle. Daniel took the first watch. He sat in the shadows, eyes scanning the horizon, ears alert to every crack, every whisper of movement. Yet beneath the silence, life still pulsed. He could hear it, the distant sound of children laughing, faint but defiant. The rustle of fabric as women hung washed clothes on lines stretched between broken walls. The low murmur of prayers whispered under the night sky. And in that moment, he realized something profound. Even in ruins, people cling to life. Even in the ashes, something burns. Still, he didn't let that thought settle. He reminded himself, I'm here to protect, not to feel. I'm here to complete the mission, not to get attached. Days bled into nights, nights back into days. Patrols became routine. Checkpoints were established. Supplies were delivered. And slowly, Daniel began to notice the faces around him. Not just the soldiers at his side, but the villagers themselves. He saw the young boy who chased a worn-out soccer ball made of rags through the dirt. He saw the elderly man who still opened his tiny shop each morning, setting out a handful of trinkets no one could afford. He saw the little girl who carried her baby brother on her hip, her small frame bending under the weight, but her steps never faltering. And he saw the schoolhouse, the broken one near their camp, beginning to stir with life again. Teachers, or what was left of them, gathered the children, sweeping dirt floors, setting cracked chairs upright, and coaxing laughter from young throats as if laughter itself could mend shattered glass. It was here, standing in the doorway of that half-ruined school, that Daniel first felt something shift inside him. He didn't know what it was. Not yet, but it was a spark. At night, when he lay on his cot under the open sky, Daniel would pull out his sister's last letter. Her handwriting was messy, rushed, but filled with warmth. She wrote about school dances, about their mother's cooking, about how strange it felt to sit at the dinner table with the chair empty. And then she wrote something that struck him harder than any bullet could. "Don't just survive out there, Danny. Promise me you'll live." He had laughed when he first read it, shaking his head at her childish wisdom. But here, in this place, surrounded by both despair and resilience, those words began to haunt him. What did it mean to live, really? Was it following orders? Was it making it home in one piece? Or was it something deeper, something he hadn't yet found? As the days unfolded, Daniel began to notice details he once would have ignored. The way the villagers planted flowers along the edges of crumbling roads, insisting on beauty even where none seemed possible. The way children sang songs in voices too pure to be silenced by gunfire. The way the night sky here seemed closer, as if every star was leaning down, listening, waiting for someone to believe again. And though he would never admit it out loud, not to his men, not even to himself, Daniel felt it. That fragile thing he had sworn to leave behind. Hope. He carried it like a secret, tucked away in the same pocket as his mother's Bible, hidden beneath the layers of discipline and duty. But it was there, flickering alive. And though he didn't yet know it, though he couldn't have imagined it, that flicker was about to become a flame. Because in this broken village, amidst rubble and ruin, Daniel was not just going to complete a mission. He was about to begin a story that would change him forever. A story not written in military reports or battlefield maps, but in the quiet, powerful language of the heart. And it all began here, with a soldier who believed he had nothing left to hope for, standing at the threshold of a schoolhouse where life, love, and destiny were waiting. Days passed, and with each sunrise, Daniel found himself settling into the rhythm of this foreign land. The dusty streets, the chatter of children in the distance, the scent of cooking fires in the air, these things no longer seemed as strange to him. They had become part of the backdrop, part of the mission he was here to complete. But what he hadn't accounted for, what no briefing or military protocol could have prepared him for, was her. Her name was Amara. He first noticed her the second day after they'd set up camp near the schoolhouse. It wasn't her beauty that caught his eye, not at first. It was the way she moved through the village, the grace in her every step, the unspoken strength in the way she carried herself. Amara wasn't a soldier. She wasn't even armed. But there was something about the way she navigated through the rubble, through the chaos, that made her stand out. She was a teacher, and though the school was little more than half-broken walls and charred wood, it was where she had chosen to stay. Daniel had seen plenty of soldiers, plenty of people who were hardened by war, but Amara was different. There was no hardened exterior to her, no coldness to her eyes. She carried the quiet fire of someone who believed in something greater than survival. She believed in people, in community, in the future. And when she caught his gaze from across the square for the first time, something in her eyes sparked. like two flames meeting in the dark. He wasn't sure what to do with that feeling, but he wasn't the kind of man who liked to feel anything at all. So he did what soldiers do best. He moved on. He didn't let himself linger in her presence. He couldn't. It wasn't part of the plan. But life, as it often does, has a way of pushing you to places you didn't expect. The next morning, Daniel's unit was assigned to assist in clearing debris around the school, to make room for a temporary classroom where the children could at least learn. It was hard work. Heavy lifting, shifting stones, pulling down old wooden beams that had once held the roof. But through all of it, Daniel couldn't shake the image of her, Amara, standing just a few feet away, her hands busy tying ropes, her eyes focused on the task at hand, but always aware of everything happening around her. She was watching, quietly, as if guarding the whole village. It was in the moments when he caught her glancing at him that the world seemed to pause. Those brief exchanges, those fleeting glances, were enough to stir something inside him. Was it curiosity? Or something deeper? Something he didn't want to acknowledge? He couldn't tell, but as the days wore on, the distance between them shrank bit by bit. One afternoon, when the heat was unbearable and the sweat stuck to his brow, Daniel took a moment to rest near the entrance of the school. He was surprised to see her sitting on a nearby stone, watching the children, dressed in clothes that were once bright, now dulled by wear and tear, running around, laughing and playing. It was an unusual sight in a place like this. The laughter of children amidst the chaos was a rare thing to witness, but there it was. And there she was, smiling softly, her eyes alive with a warmth he hadn't expected. Amara didn't notice him at first. He stood there, not sure if he should approach, feeling the weight of his uniform, the weight of his responsibilities pulling him back. But there was something in her smile, something in her gaze that felt like an invitation. He finally took a step forward, his boots crunching against the gravel. "Are they always this lively?" Daniel asked, his voice rough, as if it hadn't spoken in days. Amara turned her head slowly, her eyes meeting his. And for a moment, neither of them said anything. There was a silence between them, but it wasn't uncomfortable. It was as if they were both aware of the fragile thread that connected them, two people from worlds apart, brought together by circumstance. "Lively," she repeated, her lips curving into a small smile. "They're resilient. It's what keeps them going." Daniel nodded, unsure of what to say next. But something in the air between them shifted. Maybe it was the weight of the days they'd spent side by side, each trying to survive in this broken place, each carrying a history of loss and grief. Maybe it was the way she didn't flinch when he spoke, didn't look at him like he was just another soldier in a sea of uniforms. "You're their teacher?" Daniel asked, as though trying to place her in a box he could understand. But the truth was, nothing about her could be contained in a simple label. "Yes," she replied, her voice quiet but steady. "I was before the war, and I still am now." Daniel couldn't quite understand how she could maintain this sense of purpose in a place where everything had been stripped away. How could she continue teaching children when the world around them was falling apart? "Do you ever wonder if it's worth it?" Daniel asked, more to himself than to her, though he could feel the weight of the question hanging in the air. Amara looked at him then, her gaze steady. "Of course. But the moment we stop trying is the moment we lose everything. Don't you think?" Daniel didn't answer. He couldn't, because somewhere deep inside him, something in her words had cracked open the walls he'd spent years building around himself. He had been taught to be a soldier, to be a tool of war, a cog in a machine. But in her presence, he began to wonder if he had forgotten something far more human than the uniform he wore. "I think," he started, his voice a little softer now, "that's something I haven't figured out yet." Her smile was gentle, understanding. It was as if, in that moment, she saw right through the layers of armor he had put on. Armor not made of steel, but of silence, of duty, of a man too afraid to feel. And without saying another word, Amara turned back to watch the children, letting the soft breeze lift her hair. But Daniel didn't walk away. He stayed, because in that moment, amidst the rubble and the dust, he realized something he hadn't known before. The mission wasn't just about rebuilding this place, this village, this school. It was about rebuilding himself. And somehow, she had shown him that. There were mornings when Daniel would arrive early to the school, clearing debris, ready to carry out the day's task. But there she would be, already there, her eyes focused, her movements deliberate and sure. She would offer him a cup of water without asking, as though it was simply a part of the routine. At first, he'd taken it for granted, but soon he found himself waiting for that small gesture. It was the first crack in the armor he had built so carefully around his heart. One morning, after a long shift in the sun, Daniel sat near the edge of the village square, wiping sweat from his brow. The sun hung heavy in the sky, casting long shadows across the broken streets. He was exhausted, but there was something else pulling at him, a quiet feeling that wouldn't let go. He wasn't sure when it had started, when he had started looking forward to her presence, but he knew now that it was undeniable. She had become the center of his thoughts, the thing he had been waiting for without realizing it. And just as he settled into the heavy silence of the afternoon, Amara appeared, walking toward him with that same serene grace. "You look tired," she remarked, her voice soft, her eyes kind, but tinged with concern. "I am," Daniel admitted, his voice rough. He had no reason to hide the truth from her. For some reason, it felt easier to speak openly in her presence. "This place, it gets to you after a while." Amara sat beside him, crossing her legs beneath her. "It does. But we find strength where we can. In the work, in the people, and sometimes in the quiet moments like this one." He looked at her, unsure of what to say. Her eyes were steady, unwavering, and for a moment, Daniel wondered if she could see right through him, into the parts he had buried deep inside. "Do you ever get scared?" he asked, his voice quiet, as if the question had just slipped out before he could stop it. Amara didn't look away. Instead, she took a deep breath, exhaling slowly as if weighing her response. "Every day," she said softly, "but we don't have the luxury of fear. We push through it, not because we're strong, but because we have no choice." Daniel nodded. The truth of her words sank deep into him, resonating with something he hadn't known was there, a crack in his own walls. It was a strange feeling to be understood without having to explain, to have someone look at him and see not just the soldier, but the man behind the uniform. For the next few weeks, their conversations grew longer. At first, they spoke in fragments, small exchanges between tasks, the moments when they found themselves side by side. He'd ask about the children she taught, the stories she shared with them, the songs they sang. And she would ask about his life before the army, before he had been pulled into a war that felt as distant as the family he had left behind. But it wasn't just the words between them. It was the shared silences, the unspoken understanding that existed in the space between their conversations. There was a language they both spoke, a language that wasn't built on sentences, but on quiet glances, soft smiles, and a trust that seemed to grow stronger with each passing day. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows over the ruined village, Amara and Daniel found themselves alone outside the schoolhouse. The others had gone to bed, and the world around them had quieted to a peaceful hum. The air was cooler now, but the heat of the day still lingered in their skin. Daniel sat on a stone near the entrance of the school, his back leaning against the broken wall. He had just finished his patrol and was taking a moment to breathe. Amara came out of the shadows, holding 2 cups of tea. She handed him one, her fingers brushing against his as she did. It was the smallest touch, but it was enough to make his heart skip. "Tea?" she asked, her voice warm, inviting. "Thank you," Daniel said, taking the cup from her hands. He noticed the way her fingers lingered just a little longer than necessary, as if they both felt the quiet tension building between them. They sat in silence for a moment, sipping the tea, watching the stars begin to flicker in the sky above them. "It's strange," Amara said after a while, her voice soft but filled with thought. "How you can come from such different places and still find something familiar." Daniel glanced at her, his heart beating a little faster. "What do you mean?" She looked out toward the horizon, her gaze distant but focused. "I mean you and me. We come from different worlds, different lives. But sitting here sharing this tea, it feels easy." It was the kind of simplicity Daniel hadn't realized he had been craving. To be with someone, not as a soldier, not as a foreigner, but simply as a man. As someone who didn't have to fight for survival every moment of the day. To be, for once, allowed to be human. "I think I've forgotten what easy feels like," Daniel said quietly. "I've been fighting for so long. I don't know what it's like to just be." Amara turned to face him then, her eyes meeting his. "Maybe it's time you remembered," she said, her voice gentle but steady. And just like that, something in Daniel shifted. He had spent so long locked away in the rigid structure of his life, as a soldier, in the cold steel of his duty. But here, with Amara, he felt a warmth begin to take root. It wasn't just about survival anymore. It was about living. And he wasn't sure when it had happened, but somehow she had shown him the way. The days seemed to stretch and compress all at once. And as the weeks passed, Daniel found himself torn. It wasn't just the weight of his mission anymore. It wasn't just about completing his orders, securing the perimeter, ensuring the safety of the civilians. No, now there was something more pressing, a pull inside him that he couldn't ignore, no matter how much he tried. Amara. He couldn't stop thinking about her. Her quiet strength, the way she moved through the world with purpose, the way she made him feel like he wasn't just another soldier, but a man who could still hope. Every moment he spent near her, he felt the walls around his heart cracking. He had known, deep down, that something was growing between them, something neither of them could fully explain. And it terrified him. But the mission, his duty, was clear. His orders had not changed. He wasn't here for love. He wasn't here to build connections. He was here to stabilize, to secure, to rebuild. And the time was coming for his unit to rotate out. His orders had already been given, and his replacement had already arrived. Soon, the camp would pack up, and he'd be gone. It should have been simple. He would finish the work, bid the village farewell, and return home, back to the routine of his life. He had done it before. He could do it again. But as the days passed, Daniel realized something terrifying. He didn't want to leave. The thought of leaving Amara, of walking away from the fragile connection they had built, twisted something deep inside him. He had been trained to fight wars, to endure pain, to sacrifice. But none of that had prepared him for this. None of it had prepared him for the possibility of a life without her in it. One evening, as the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the village, Daniel found himself standing outside the schoolhouse once more. It was their final night together before his unit was set to leave. He had told himself over and over that it was just part of the job. He had to go. It was what he had trained for. He had his duty to fulfill. But in the quiet, in the stillness of the evening, everything felt different. Amara appeared from the shadows, walking toward him with her usual grace. But this time, there was something in her eyes that caught him off guard. It wasn't the quiet strength he was used to seeing. It was something softer, something uncertain. "You're leaving tomorrow, aren't you?" she asked, her voice quiet but steady. Daniel nodded, unable to look at her. "Yes, I have to. It's part of the mission." She took a step closer, her gaze never leaving his face. "I know, but that doesn't make it easier, does it?" "No," Daniel admitted, his voice thick with emotion. "It doesn't." There was a long silence between them, the weight of the moment settling over them like a heavy fog. The air was thick with the unsaid words, the feelings neither of them had dared to express. "I never thought I'd get attached to this place," Daniel said finally, his voice rough. "To the people here. But you—" He stopped, struggling to find the right words. You've made me feel like I'm more than just a soldier. Like I'm more than the uniform I wear. Amara's eyes softened, but her expression remained steady. And you are, Daniel. You're so much more. The words hung in the air between them. He wanted to reach out to her, to close the distance, but something held him back. Something that felt like duty, like responsibility, like the weight of the world pressing down on his shoulders. I don't want to leave, Daniel said, his voice barely above a whisper. I don't want to leave you. Amara's face softened, but she shook her head slowly. You have to. It's your mission. You have to finish it. It's what you were sent here to do. I know, Daniel said, his voice heavy with regret. But what if this is the last time I ever see you? Amara took a deep breath, her expression unreadable. Maybe it is. Maybe it isn't. But what we've shared, what we have, it's real. And it doesn't depend on whether or not you stay. Daniel looked at her, trying to understand, trying to make sense of it all. His heart was torn. He had spent his life following orders, pushing aside everything else, everything that didn't fit into the rigid structure of duty. But this was different. Then why does it feel like I'm leaving a part of myself behind? He asked, his voice cracking. Amara reached out, her hand gently touching his arm. Because you are, she said softly. But that's okay. It's okay to leave pieces of yourself behind. Sometimes we have to let go of certain things to grow. Daniel closed his eyes, feeling the weight of her words. He wanted to hold on to her, to pull her into his arms and never let go. But he knew he couldn't. Not this time. The mission wasn't over. His duty wasn't finished. For a moment, they just stood there, the sounds of the village echoing softly in the background, the wind carrying the faint scent of jasmine for the garden Amara had planted. And in that moment, everything seemed to stand still. The pain of leaving, the confusion of what they had shared, the weight of the decisions that lay ahead, all of it crashed over him in waves. I don't know if I can do this, Daniel whispered, his voice raw with emotion. You don't have to know, Amara said, her voice steady and sure. You just have to keep moving forward. Whatever comes next, you'll be okay. And so will I. And with that, she turned, walking slowly back toward the schoolhouse, her silhouette blending into the darkening night. Daniel stood there for a long time, his heart heavy, his thoughts in turmoil. The weight of the world seemed to press down on him, and for the first time, he wasn't sure he could carry it alone. As the night deepened, Daniel knew that he was standing at a crossroads. He had always believed in duty, in following orders, in doing what was expected of him. But now, with Amara's words echoing in his mind, he wondered if it was time to rethink what was truly important. Was duty the only thing worth fighting for? Or had he forgotten something more vital, something that had nothing to do with missions and orders and everything to do with the human heart? The day Daniel's unit left the village, the air was thick with the weight of unspoken words. The mission was complete. The repairs had been made, the village had been stabilized, and the peacekeepers were rotating out. But for Daniel, it felt like an unfinished story, one that had no clear ending, no conclusion. He could feel it in his bones, the aching void left behind as he boarded the transport plane. It wasn't just the dusty streets of the village or the faces of the children he would never see again. It was Amara, the woman who had shown him what it meant to live, not just survive. He had left her behind, and it hurt more than he could have ever imagined. The flight back to his base was long, and the sound of the engines did little to drown out the constant barrage of thoughts racing through his mind. He had done what he was supposed to do. He had followed orders. He had completed the mission. And yet, a part of him, an important part, fell hollow, as if he had left something behind that he would never be able to get back. Back home, everything felt strange. The sounds, the faces, the routine. Nothing felt like it used to. His family greeted him at the airport with smiles and embraces, but their words felt distant, muffled, as though they were speaking in another language. It was as if he had returned to the life he once knew, but that life no longer fit him. Daniel knew he had changed. The man who had boarded that plane to the village was not the same as the one who had returned. He had felt hope, a hope that wasn't just about survival, but about living, about connection. And Amara had shown him that. But as the weeks passed, that hope seemed to slip further away. His letters to her, written in the silence of his room, were never sent. They were too full of words he couldn't bring himself to say. The letters piled up, forgotten, like everything else he had left behind. He was a soldier again, doing what soldiers do, following orders, keeping his emotions locked away. But it wasn't enough. Then, one day, he found himself staring at the last letter he had written to her. The envelope, still unopened, sat on his desk, mocking him with its silence. In that moment, he realized something. He couldn't keep living like this. He couldn't just let it go. He couldn't ignore the part of himself that had been awakened by Amara. He had promised her that he would find his way back, and that promise was one he intended to keep. Daniel didn't know what to expect when he boarded the flight back. He had no idea if she would even be there, if she would remember him, if what they had shared in that small, war-torn village meant anything. But as the plane touched down in the village once again, something inside him felt certain. He had to see her. He had to face the truth of what he had left behind and what he still longed for. The village had changed in his absence. The sounds of reconstruction were quieter now, the children no longer running through the streets with the same energy. It was as if the life that had been so vibrant in the days before had now dulled into something more permanent. Yet, even in the stillness, he could feel it, the same pull, the same force that had drawn him to her in the first place. Daniel made his way through the village, his heart beating faster with each step. He didn't know what he would say to her, but he knew he couldn't leave without at least trying. He found her by the schoolhouse, just as he had the first time. She was standing in the same spot, watching the children play in the distance, her face calm, but there was a sadness in her eyes that he hadn't noticed before. For a moment, he just stood there, watching her. She was so much a part of this place, this village, this life, that he had forgotten how much it had meant to him, and how much she meant to him. Amara turned, and when she saw him, there was no surprise in her eyes. It was as if she had known he would come back. "Daniel," she said softly, her voice a gentle whisper that carried the weight of everything unsaid between them. He stepped forward, his chest tightening. "I couldn't stay away." She looked at him, her gaze steady. "I know. I'm sorry," Daniel said, his voice raw. "I should have written. I should have." "No," she interrupted, walking toward him, her steps slow but purposeful. "You did what you had to do. You followed your duty." Daniel shook his head. "I followed the wrong thing. I thought duty was all I had. But it wasn't. It was you. It always was." For a moment, neither of them spoke. The wind had picked up, and the air was cooler now, the sky streaked with the last colors of the setting sun. Daniel could feel the weight of her presence, the quiet understanding that had always been between them. "I never wanted to leave you," Daniel said quietly. "But I thought I had no choice. I thought I had to do what was expected of me." Amara smiled softly, but there was no bitterness in it. "You're here now. That's what matters." For the first time since he had arrived back, Daniel felt like he could breathe. The tension that had gripped his chest since leaving her, since leaving the village, began to loosen. He was here. He had come back. And that was enough. "I promised you I would find my way back," Daniel said, his voice steady now. "And I meant it." Amara took a step closer, and for a long moment, neither of them moved. Then, slowly, she reached out and took his hand. "You found your way back," she said softly. "And that's all that matters." Daniel smiled, his heart swelling with a sense of peace he had never known before. The weight of the world had finally lifted, replaced by something far more valuable: love. He had fought so many battles in his life, but none had been as important as this one. And he had won. And as they stood together, in the quiet of the village that had brought them together, Daniel knew that the mission wasn't over. It had only just begun.